Yo, what's going on, everybody? We're back with another Vitamin C's as usual. I'm your boy Adam Taylor. You can find me over at CelticsBlog.com, Heavy.com, OddsCheckerUS.com, and anywhere that Celtics content lives online. As usual, I'm joined by my homie, my compadre, my co-host in crime, Mr. Tim Shields. Find him over at CelticsBlog.com and over at CLNSmedia.com. And I said it without tripping over my words today. We're talking improvements, Tim. We're talking improvements. And your name's Tim? Tim, the tall man.
Yes.
Home improvements. This is what I'm doing here. I'm going right back to the 90s, bruh.
You do love that one. You do. Hey, this is like the second time you randomly mentioned Home Improvement. So like now I know that like it's you loved it, man.
That shit did. Seriously, old school. Okay, so today we're going to be jumping into FiveThirtyEight released their predictions for the rest of the season. They had the Celtics as the number one team with the highest odds of coming out of the finals as champions. So as far as FiveThirtyEight are concerned, all their algorithms are telling them if the Celtics play the way they've been playing over this win streak, they're the best team in the NBA. The statistics back that up. I'm not sure whether I'm buying in after a 9-game or a 23-game sample size from the 1st of January to now. It's been 23 games. They've won 17, dropped 6. Before we go any further, make sure to hit that like button, that subscribe button, and leave a nice comment. Now we're going to dive back into the conversation. Where do you stand on this? Because obviously FiveThirtyEight seem like they're really big on the Celtics' chances of success.
I mean, obviously, from like a Celtics perspective, I like it. Like, I like to hear that they're playing well enough that the statistics are saying that they are a good team and that they're a favorite. In terms of recency, I feel like it's a little bit too rushed. I don't want to put too much faith into the analytics, and I'm betting that the team doesn't either. Like, you can't just lean on this kind of thing because these projections, it's a math equation. It's just going off of the basis of like, hey, if they keep playing like this, they're going to get probably the first seed in the East, and they're going to have home court. And if they keep defending teams like this and holding them to such low like point totals, they're going to win more games and they're going to keep, rolling as they are. I don't know if that's going to stay happening. Like, that would be ridiculously optimistic to think that's going to happen. But yeah, regardless if you think that they are the best and they have the best chance at getting a title this year, you still have to believe that they are starting to enter that conversation of being a contender. Like, I don't think that's debatable. I don't know if I would say that like they're the favorite, and I really don't want to put too much faith into that. But at the very least, it's still worth like acknowledging. It's got them finishing with a projected record of 50-32. If you told people about 2.5 months ago that that was a possibility, they probably would have laughed in your face. But here we stand. You're muted.
In my head, I'm like, that feels reasonable. Do you know what I'm saying? Like 50-32. I can see that with the way the team are playing right now, the defense that they're playing, the way they just absolutely kick the living daylights out of the Sixers. That was joyous, by the way. I'm sorry, but can we take a moment to rejoice?
That was insane. I didn't expect that. It's the best Tuesday I've had in a while.
The best Tuesday, As an Englishman, I say chew, as in I'm chewing my food. Tuesday.
Oh.
Yeah, it's what new. But no, seriously, I think that was a really good game, and it was also a statement game. It was a game with intent. Now, the Celtics being the Celtics, they need to remain healthy. I think that's first and foremost, right? And when you talk about health and you talk about the Celtics team, Rob Williams is always going to be one of the first names that you get concerned with. Marcus Smart rolled an ankle against the Sixers. Luckily, he's only questionable going into the Detroit game, and it's quite likely that by the time the All-Star break's over, because the Detroit game's the last game until after the All-Star break, so he's got like a solid 7 days to recuperate, including, so 8 days, including the day of recording for us today, which is Wednesday. I feel like by then that ankle should be okay, but that staying healthy is going to be key. Now, do I think that the Celtics, as currently constructed, are a championship team? Personally, no, I don't. If I'm being very honest, taking off the green goggles, I came into the season telling myself that a second round exit was going to be a solid year. I'm not going to waver away from that, because then if they get further, it's a pleasant surprise. And if they fall sooner, I can hold them accountable in terms of, wow, this is where I felt like was a very reasonable area to ascertain, and all of a sudden you've just, you know what I mean? So I'm kind of just like, second round exit, anything more is a blessing, anything less is failure.
And I think that's a realistic expectation in order to kind of curb the enthusiasm around them right now. All of a sudden, like they're turning into these kind of statistical darlings. They're looking like a very good defensive team, one of the best in the league, like what, 0.1 or 0.2 behind a team like Golden State. And this is also factoring out junk time, and this is including the entire year statistics. So this isn't just the last 2.5 months. They have been, for like the last 2.5 months, the best defensive team in the NBA. Like, they are going to win games based on their defense. So it's just a matter of whether or not they can keep that pace up, if teams are going to be able to adjust, if foul calls are going to impact us in the playoffs. Matchups matter the most. So like that also is going to impact how far this team can go. Like if you can avoid the Bucks until the Eastern Conference Finals, like that's good. The Nets are potentially a play-in team. I don't know if that impacts things if they make it or if they don't make it, like who makes it in their place. Does Boston struggle with a matchup against the Atlanta Hawks if they face them in the playoffs? It's a team that they just beat, but they've struggled against because they've got some really, really good shooting there. So there are a lot of factors in how deep this Celtics team can go. I think if you look back even 2.5 months, my expectations for this team were not particularly high. I was looking at this as like a potential bridge year, as they call it, where this is a team that, wasn't as good as it should have been on paper. And you have a brand new coach. You have a whole new system that you're trying to run. It's just vastly different than what we've been used to, because the Celtics haven't missed the playoffs or have been a playoff team since Brad Stevens' first year, where they were clearly tanking. So like it's just very different. And I don't know, I don't want to put too much stock into the analytics right now, but I think a second round exit is, I think, the bare minimum. And I think you're right in that regard.
Yeah, and I think for me, like the one thing that I'm really kind of pushing back on with a lot of people, and you mentioned it just, so I want to push back with you too, is everybody's saying, oh, well, the Celtics, since the 1st of January, they're only like less than half a point behind the Warriors in defensive efficiency. That's true. But what people keep failing to say at the end of that sentence is, but the Warriors have been struggling for the past 4 or 5 weeks. You know what I mean? The Warriors are a .500 team pretty much since the start of the month, the start of the year even. I think since Klay Thompson come back, they've kind of struggled to reintegrate him. Steph Curry's going through a little bit of a crisis of character. Draymond Green not being there. Their defense is obviously not being as marshaled as well as what it could be when Draymond's there. If you look at the last 2 weeks of basketball, just those last 14 days, the Warriors are 20th in defensive rating. They've really fell off in terms of their defensive efficiency. Now, if they'd carried on at the pace they started the season at, Boston would probably be a couple of points behind them in defensive efficiency. Now, I'm not taking nothing away from the Celtics to come from where they were to second in the league and how they were playing to how they're playing now. That's enormous progress. But when everybody's like, oh, well, they're nearly first in the league in defensive. Yeah, but there's other factors beyond what they're doing too. The Warriors have fallen off a little bit. The Milwaukee Bucks, I think I read earlier, when the Milwaukee Bucks have got their big three, they're winning available, which they've seldom had all year. They're winning about 80% of their games. The Celtics are at the moment riding the crest of a wave, and a lot of the analytics are really favoring them because we're shortening the sample sizes. We're looking at what they're doing right now in a really good moment rather than looking at the entire season and trying to find a baseline, being like, right, so here are the outliers for the bad. Here are the outliers for the good. Where are we going to fall in the middle? And I feel like these 538 projections and any other projection that's telling everybody the Celtics have started the year, they've added Derek White, they've added Daniel Tyson, all of a sudden they're championship favourites. I feel like that's just building up a bunch of people for a really hard fall back down to earth when it doesn't happen. So that second place in the, second playoff, that's fine. I don't think they're a playing team anymore. I genuinely believe they're going to be like a 4th seed. For me, the biggest battle between now and the end of the season, fight for home court advantage. Once you get home court advantage, everything changes. You can really, maybe a conference finals is on the cards. Maybe it's not. Who's your first round opponent? Who's your second round opponent? Matchups are just as important. So I like these statistics. I think they're really fun to make. I mean, we're talking about it. It makes good conversation, but I'm not buying into it.
Yeah, and I think that's totally fair. it's hard to buy into it, especially after we saw the Celtics struggle for months. And I think this is like the defense that we had hoped we would see with Ime Udoka. He was touted as a defensive coach, which kind of falls into the mantra of what Brad Stevens was doing before he left as coach. And now he's obviously Pobo. So like that's a completely different position for him too. Pobo. So just navigating the waters of how they're rebuilding. But, like just figuring out like how this team is going to run their lineups now. Like you're introducing a really strong defender, Daniel Tice. All of a sudden that center position looks a lot more fluid. You've got some good defense there, and it's a lot more versatile than what you had when you had Ennis Freedom on the roster. You brought in Derek White, who's a lot better than anyone you had behind Marcus Smart. And he's also a guy that you can run down in, clutch lineups. But even before they went out and got Daniel Tice, before they went out and they got Derek White, the team was improving. They were improving really, really good. Like they looked good. And so it's just a matter of water finding its level. Like, are they on is this crest as high as they're going to go? How long can they maintain it? Or is like the quality of this team somewhere in between that super, super low and the super, super high? And I think the next,
sorry, no, that's okay. The more important is what happens when you come off that crest.
How do you respond?
How do you respond? And if anybody watches all the the Celtics Celtics blog podcast episodes I put up here, you would have probably seen the one I did with Keith Smith over the weekend. And Keith made a really good point there. These losses, when teams are succeeding the way they are right now, the loss usually comes courtesy of a blowout. That's usually how these runs end. You just get torn up. You come in, you're a bit lackluster, you've bought into your own hype, somebody gives you a good whooping, and then it's on you to bounce back. Now, that how you respond when all of a sudden this run stops and that momentum grinds to a halt, that's going to tell you a lot about this team. Do they respond straight away and get back to winning ways, or do they start reforming to bad habits? That's when you're really going to see what this team's made of.
And I think the one thing that gives a good impression for me was a lot of these games they've not played well offensively. They have won games strictly on their defense. Like they're forcing so many turnovers, and it's just impressive with the way that they're scheming against some of these guys. So the way that they were able to scheme against Joel Embiid was promising, because that's a guy that you could potentially face in the playoffs, with the 76ers being where they're at. And it's a player that you have to worry about, because if you're trying to get up the standings in the East, you got to be prepared to defend those guys. I'm interested to see if I don't know the schedule off the top of my head. Do they face the Bucks at all in the remaining games?
Probably.
I think they've got their second to last game is against the Bucks.
Lovely.
And that's based on the way the East has been running right now. That's going to hold a lot of weight. So I'm interested to see how they're defending against some of these stars, because that's really, when we talk about matchups, that's the big thing. And that's why I feel like
defending Giannis is completely different to defending Embiid, right?
Oh, and that's what I'm saying. Matchups matter. It's the same thing with that Atlanta game. Told me a lot more about the Celtics and how they look to go with Derek White and Daniel Tice in the fold. Daniel obviously didn't play that game, but you're going to be able to lean on him as part of your rotation. And Atlanta's just a team that I feel like for at least the last 2 years has been getting under Boston's skin. They're a really good shooting team. Trae Young is obviously a savvy guy who knows how to get to the line. He's a deadly three-point shooter. We talked about Clint Capella being an elite rim runner. There's a lot of teams that are going to give Boston problems in different ways. And it's just, again, always waters down to how are they going to respond.
Do you know what as well, though? If you look at, someone messaged me the other day saying, why didn't the Celtics run more drop against Trae? And I'm like, because if you drop against Trae, he lights you up in the mid-range. You can run him off the 3-point line, but if you drop, then he's got too much room in the mid-range. So that's why you don't drop. That's why you switch. Now, ideally, you're going to want somebody on the low help line that's going to rotate over, but that means your high side Iron Man needs to split the difference. So you need to trust your high side Iron Man to be good enough to angle out to defend against two guys. So there's a lot that goes into defending a Trae Young once he penetrates. But then you look at Udoka, and I'm like, the biggest measure of a coach is their ability to make adjustments throughout a series. I think that's what I'm very big on. When people are like, oh, this coach has got an X and X record, I'm like, yeah, but what is it in the playoffs? What is it in a 7-game series? Because when you really see the true quality of a coach. And I think this is where Brad Stevens excelled, is making game-to-game adjustments. If you're playing the same opponent 7 times, you can't show them the same coverages 7 times. You can't run the same ATOs 7 times, SL slubs, blubs, sidelines out of bounds, baseline out of bounds. You can't run that same shit because they will know it. They will scheme you out of the game. And, you know, when you're playing against a conference rival that you may have played 3-4 times already this year, they already know some of the stuff that you're coming in with. So those adjustments, that getting creative with what you're doing in your timeouts, what you're doing with your ATOs, that all plays a part in, for me, building an understanding of just how creative and how intelligent Udoka is as a game management and alteration making coach. And that's going to be big, because I think what he's done so far is he's really got guys to buy in. They're really replicating the brand of basketball he's been chiming on about. And I think he's done a fantastic job. I was really hard on him to start the year. I think he's done really, really well. But the last question I have is, how can you make adjustments when the playoffs roll around? And that, I think, for me, expecting the Celtics to win a championship on a rookie head coach's first year based on a 9-game sample size, if you want to spread it to January as well, on a 23-game sample size, that's fucking ridiculous, man.
Yeah, it's just too much. And I think talking about factors that we don't know yet, especially with Ime. Sure. I mean, he's been an assistant. You know, he was an assistant with the Spurs when they won their title, if I'm correct, right? Because he was there from 2012 through 2019. So he was there during that championship, the last Spurs championship that they had when Kawhi was there. Kawhi winning,
being an
Finals
MVP. Is different to being the one if you make the ball and it goes wrong.
Yeah, and when that's also too, but I think the one thing that helps in that regard is he's being there, being present, and seeing what a coach does in those moments. I think him being a coach. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about Greg Popovich, one of the greatest coaches of all time. So being able to sit behind him and see how he's managing it, and honestly, it's scary because this team is defensively like so honed in, like it just gives you kind of like those Spurs vibes, like old school basketball defense. So I really want to see how there are adjustments, because again, like a team like Atlanta, like in a 7-game series, you really have to be able to figure out how to throw them off their game, because when those shooters are hot, like you've got Bogdanovich, you got Huerter, you've got Young, like there are multiple guys on that roster. Hunter's another guy you have to worry about too. Like there are guys who can just hit threes, and that's really, really hard to keep up with. And they can fall back into their old habits too. If you're trying to hit threes in order to keep up with them hitting threes, then it might turn into a slippery slope.
And more importantly, like, you know, you've got Atlanta, but you've still got Chicago will be at full strength by the playoffs. You know, you don't sleep on Chicago. Chicago are legit as shit. You know, if it's not Chicago, then you're going to have Philly with James Harden. That James Harden, Joel Embiid pick and roll is going to be nightmares. Then you're going to have the Bucks that are at full strength. Like, who else? Am I missing anybody right now? Chicago, Atlanta, Milwaukee, Philly, Boston.
Brooklyn, if they make it.
Yeah, Brooklyn, but, you know, you're only going to get Kyrie for 50% of the games. So I just like, and that's not even a slight, that's the truth, you know what I mean? But again, you're going to have a Ben Simmons and Kevin Durant duo, you know what I mean? So, we don't even know, what's that going to look like? You know what I mean? That's going to be weird, because Kevin Durant's going to be the ball handler in that scenario.
It's scary. I mean,
you have to pick and pop with Kevin Durant as the pop guy. Like, there's a lot of variation there, and they've got Joe Harris, and they've got Seth. You know what I'm saying? They've got shooters up and down that roster right now.
And I also think it's crazy that they were able to get that stuff from Philly, like being able to bring in a guy like Seth Curry, who's like 50, 40, 90. So, like, you're adding a 50.
Dude, look, one of the best backup bigs.
It just shores them up. And, like, that's another thing. If Brooklyn can manage to, like, kind of wade through these troubled waters and make it through the play-in, like, who knows what happens. But honestly, like, if they're in a play-in situation where they have to play in Brooklyn and this mandate is still in place, and then they play against somebody else where they can't play again, like, you're in this spot now because you went ahead and you traded away Harden. But if you didn't want to be there,
they traded away Harden, but you know, like, Ben Simmons can replicate Harden's assists. Ben Simmons can take over the ball handling duties that you're not getting from Kyrie.
And like, a massive plus defensively too. And that's what they need. Their defense was bad.
I mean, we're talking about duos. The only team in the East, really, there's only 2 teams, in my opinion, that have a big 3 or more. So Chicago have like a big 4. You know what I mean? Like, you got Lonzo, Zach, DeMar, Vooch. It could be a big five if you want to throw Caruso in there, but let's not get stupid here. Then you've got Milwaukee. They've got Giannis, Drew, and Middleton. So they've got a big three. But then the rest of duos, Embiid and Harden, Tatum and Brown, now Durant and Simmons. It's going to be like that is going to be a tough Eastern Conference. Then you look out west. If you make it through the East, Golden State. I mean, I don't really think the Lakers are going to do much. The Clippers aren't going to do much this year. They're more set up for next season at this point. Memphis could get somewhere. They've been playing ridiculously well right now. Who else? Denver ain't really going to get nowhere.
I mean, Jazz are still at fourth right now.
Yeah,
obviously, the
Suns.
Suns are a freaking wagon still. Nuggets, you got to figure out what's going on with them.
That's not happening there.
Yeah, I mean,
they've got too many injuries, injuries to Porter Jr. and an injury to Jamal Murray.
Jamal Murray still recovering.
Yeah, and even if he does come back, he's not going to be at his best.
It's going to take a long time.
Denver's another team that I'm like, Denver, like the Clippers, I'm like, yo, you watch out for those guys next year.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Right now, I'm not worried.
Yeah, I think the East is just such a dogfight. Like, it's going to be really, really tough. And again, like, I think that's when we look at these 538 predictions.
We haven't even mentioned the Cavs.
Yeah, and that's another team too. Like Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, Darius Garland, Kevin Love. Like they're playing really, really good basketball.
Yeah, for sure, dude.
And you have to worry about teams like that, especially a young and hungry team trying to prove something in the playoffs. So again, like the East being a dogfight, everything that's going on there, you have to figure out what's going to happen through the rest of the season. And that's really going to tell me what this team is capable of, is how they finish out the rest of the season, how they take a punch, how they take their lumps, and how they respond to it. So it'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out by the end of it.
And that's about it. I think that pretty much wraps us up. So if you've enjoyed the show, make sure you hit that like button, the subscribe button. You leave a nice comment. You share. Sharing is the most important. Sharing is caring. Tell everybody the Vitamin C's is the best Celtics discussion on YouTube. We're only on YouTube. We don't put this out as a podcast. I might chop it up a little bit and put it on some Instagram just to get more eyes. But the best way for this show to grow is for everybody to share. We recently hit over 500 subscribers. That's dope. We want to get to 1,000 within the next 6 hours. Let's do it. Help us. Now, seriously, though, the quicker we get to 1,000, the quicker we can, the quicker we can have a look at this being something more viable and start bringing you extra content and doing extra cool stuff. So, as usual, thank you for paying attention. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Tim, thank you for being with me, my guy.
Of course.
We bid you farewell.
Cheers.